The most terrifying moment in a man's life is not when he loses power. It is when he realizes he abandoned something that looked exactly like him. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above the grand ballroom of the Bellevue Imperial Hotel, while Seattle's wealthiest guests moved through rivers of champagne and soft jazz music beneath golden lights. Women in designer gowns laughed beside politicians and celebrities. Waiters carried silver trays between marble pillars taller than most apartment ceilings. At the center of it all stood Adrian Kong, perfectly still in a tailored black tuxedo worth more than the average American salary. At 43 years old, the Korean Mafia Boss had mastered the art of emotional emptiness. His expression rarely changed. His voice rarely rose. Men twice his size lowered their eyes when he entered rooms like this. And tonight's charity gala belonged entirely to him. The children's hospital wing would not exist without Mr. Kang's generosity, the announcer declared proudly across the ballroom stage. Applause filled the room immediately. Adrian barely reacted. One hand rested inside his pocket, while the other loosely held a crystal glass of whiskey reflecting the chandelier light above. The applause always sounded distant to him now. Meaningless. 7 years of wealth had passed since the last time anything truly reached his heart. "Sir," Daniel Brooks murmured quietly beside him. "The governor wants another photograph before the auction begins." Adrian gave a distracted nod, but his attention had already drifted elsewhere. Toward the far side of the ballroom, near the dessert tables. 3 children stood there alone. Triplets, around 6 years old. 2 boys and 1 little girl wearing simple second-hand clothes completely out of place among luxury diamonds and million-dollar watches. One boy carefully balanced 3 tiny slices of chocolate cake on paper plates, while the little girl tried unsuccessfully to stop her brothers from stealing frosting with their fingers. Ordinary children. Yet something about them made Adrian stop breathing for half a second. "Whose kids are those?" Adrian asked quietly. Daniel glanced across the ballroom. Probably staff family members. But Adrian kept staring, because the smallest boy had just turned sideways beneath the chandelier light. Same dark eyes. Same sharp cheekbones. Same habit of narrowing one eye while concentrating. Adrian's fingers tightened slowly around the whiskey glass. Impossible. The little boy looked up suddenly toward the ballroom crowd, and the entire world seemed to freeze. Adrian saw himself. Not metaphorically. Not emotionally. Literally. It was like staring into a childhood photograph nobody else could see. The boy even tilted his head the same way Adrian used to during meetings when he distrusted someone. The whiskey glass slipped from Adrian's hand and shattered violently across the marble floor. Music stopped almost instantly. Conversations died. More than 200 guests turned toward him in confusion. Adrian never lost composure. Never. But he did not even notice the silence around him now. His eyes remained locked on the little boy near the dessert table. The child stared back, curiously, while frosting covered one small hand. Then another tiny figure stepped closer beside him. The little girl. Same dark hair. Same eyes. Same face shape. Adrian felt something cold spread through his chest. "Sir." Daniel's voice sounded distant now. "Adrian." Another businessman asked nervously nearby. But Adrian could not answer anyone, because suddenly the final child turned around too. And this time the room truly disappeared. The third little boy laughed at something his brother whispered before pushing dark curls away from his forehead exactly the way Adrian's mother used to do when she was nervous. The exact same gesture. The exact same eyes. The exact same blood. Adrian stopped breathing entirely. Then slowly, from the far side of the ballroom near the service entrance, a woman stepped into view carrying an empty silver tray against her chest. Dark skin. Tired eyes. Black waitress uniform beneath soft yellow lights. Naomi Brooks froze the moment she saw him staring at the children. The tray nearly slipped from her hands. And in that single horrifying second, Adrian Kong finally understood why the triplets looked exactly like him. For several long seconds, nobody inside the ballroom moved. Crystal chandeliers still glowed above tables covered in gold silk and white roses, but the warmth of the charity gala had vanished completely. All attention remained fixed on Adrian Kong, standing motionless beside shattered whiskey glass scattered across polished marble floors. The Korean Mafia Boss did not blink, did not breathe normally, did not even hear the nervous whispers beginning to spread through Seattle's elite guests around him. His eyes remained locked on Naomi Brooks. 7 years disappeared in an instant. He remembered everything now. The tiny jazz bar in Tacoma where she used to sing on Friday nights beneath dim amber lights. The way she laughed with her entire face when she forgot to be careful around him. The cheap apartment with broken heating where she once made grilled cheese sandwiches at 2 in the morning because Adrian claimed rich restaurants ruined comfort food. He remembered her hands resting nervously over her stomach the night she told him she was pregnant. And then his own voice. Cold. Empty. Cruel. Get rid of it. Naomi stood frozen near the service entrance holding the silver tray so tightly her knuckles turned pale beneath the ballroom lights. Her waitress uniform looked painfully ordinary compared to the diamonds surrounding her. Black dress, shoes worn at the soles. Name tags slightly crooked against the fabric. Dark curls pulled back quickly for work. But none of the wealthy people staring around the ballroom could see what Adrian saw. The woman he abandoned carrying his children alone. Mom. One of the little boys waved excitedly toward her while balancing cake frosting across his fingers. Naomi's face changed instantly. Fear first, then panic. Micah, she called softly, trying to steady her voice. Stay near your brother. Adrian's heartbeat slammed painfully against his ribs. Micah. The little boy frowned slightly exactly the way Adrian did during negotiations. Another child tugged gently on Naomi's sleeve. The little girl. Mama, are we in trouble? Naomi immediately knelt beside her, forcing calm into her expression despite the terror flooding her eyes. No. Baby, she whispered softly. Everything is okay. But Adrian knew it was not okay. Not even close. Daniel stepped carefully beside him, lowering his voice enough that only Adrian could hear. Sir. Adrian did not look away from the children. How old are they? Daniel hesitated. Approximately 6. Adrian's stomach turned cold. 6 years. Exactly 6. The timing hit him like a physical blow. Around them, guests continued whispering nervously while hotel staff rushed to clean the shattered glass from the floor. But Adrian barely noticed the ballroom anymore. His entire world had narrowed to 3 children standing beside Naomi beneath chandelier light. One little boy reached automatically for Naomi's hand while the other leaned against her side. Protective. Comfortable. Familiar. They loved her completely. Adrian suddenly realized something horrifying. They had no idea who he was. Sir, Daniel said quietly, people are watching. Adrian finally moved. One slow step forward. Naomi immediately stiffened. The fear in her eyes deepened so quickly it almost stopped him cold. Not hatred. Fear. Like she genuinely believed he could still destroy her life after all these years. The realization sickened him. Naomi, Adrian said softly. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his throat now. Fragile somehow. The ballroom fell silent again the moment he spoke to her. Naomi swallowed hard before standing slowly in front of the triplets, shielding them without thinking. Adrian noticed that immediately too. The little girl peeked curiously around Naomi's arm toward him while one of the boys whispered, Mom, who is that? Naomi's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Because how could she possibly answer that question? Adrian looked at the children again, then back at Naomi. And for the first time in years, the powerful mafia boss felt something he could not control. Shame. Naomi could feel every wealthy eye inside the ballroom pressing against her skin. The chandeliers above suddenly seemed too bright. The music that had once sounded elegant now felt distant and distorted beneath the pounding in her chest. 7 years. 7 years of surviving double shifts, unpaid bills, fevers at 3 in the morning, secondhand clothes, and tiny birthday cakes shared between 4 people in cramped apartments. And now Adrian Kong stood 10 feet away staring at the children he once erased with a single sentence. Mom, the little girl whispered again, tugging gently on Naomi's sleeve. Who is he? Naomi forced herself to breathe slowly before kneeling beside the triplets. Her hands trembled despite every effort to steady them. Just stay close to me, okay? She said softly. The boys nodded immediately. Adrian watched the entire exchange without speaking. The smallest details hurt the most. The way the children trusted her voice instantly. The way one little boy absent-mindedly reached for her hand while watching the ballroom nervously. The way Naomi positioned herself slightly in front of them without even thinking about it. Protective. Constant. A mother who had done this alone for years. Daniel leaned closer toward Adrian again. Sir, perhaps we should continue this privately. But Adrian barely heard him. His mind had already fallen backward through time. 7 years earlier, rain hammered against the windows of his downtown penthouse, while Naomi stood near the fireplace holding a pregnancy test with shaking hands. She had looked terrified that night too, but hopeful. God, she had still been hopeful back then. Adrian, she whispered softly into memory, we are having a baby. The younger version of Adrian sat behind his desk wearing a charcoal suit after a 12-hour negotiation with rival investors. Whiskey rested untouched beside stacks of contracts. His phone vibrated every few seconds with calls from men demanding decisions worth millions. Naomi smiled nervously while stepping closer. I know this is unexpected, but maybe. Adrian remembered the exhaustion first, then the irritation, then the coldness that entered his voice so naturally it frightened him now. No, Naomi stopped moving. What? You heard me. He never even stood up from the desk. Get rid of it. Back in the present, Adrian's jaw tightened painfully. The memory felt unbearable now because he remembered what came next too. Naomi's silence. Not screaming. Not begging. Somehow that made it worse. She had simply stared at him like she no longer recognized the man in front of her. It is your child, she whispered finally. Adrian had looked away first. That is exactly why this cannot happen. The ballroom around him blurred again as shame twisted through his chest like broken glass. He had convinced himself back then that children were weaknesses men like him could not afford. Attachments created vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities destroyed empires. So Adrian Kong chose power instead. And Naomi disappeared before he ever learned there were 3 heartbeats instead of 1. Sir, Daniel's voice pulled him back into the present again. Adrian looked up slowly. Naomi still stood protectively beside the triplets beneath golden ballroom lights. But now one of the little boys had wandered slightly closer toward the dessert table again, curious eyes fixed on Adrian. Micah, Naomi warned softly. Do not wander. But the boy ignored her for another second before looking directly at Adrian. You dropped your drink, he said innocently. Several nearby guests awkwardly pretended not to listen. Adrian stared down at the child. Up close, the resemblance felt almost unbearable. Same eyes, same stubborn calm, same slight crease between the brows when concentrating. The boy tilted his head curiously. Are you famous? A few nervous laughs escaped around the ballroom. Adrian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because nobody had asked him such a simple question in years. Not politicians. Not business partners. Not enemies. And certainly not a child who unknowingly carried his blood. Micah studied him another moment before asking quietly, Why do you look sad? The entire ballroom went silent again. Because for the first time in decades, Adrian Kong realized he had no idea how to answer honestly. The silence inside the ballroom stretched so long it began to feel unnatural. Crystal chandeliers glimmered above frozen guests, while hotel staff quietly backed away from the center of the room, unsure whether to continue serving champagne or disappear entirely. Nobody in Seattle's elite circles had ever seen Adrian Kong speechless before. The powerful mafia boss could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking. Yet now he stood staring at a 6-year-old boy asking why he looked sad. Micah waited patiently for an answer while holding a half-eaten piece of chocolate cake in one small hand. The innocence in the child's face made Adrian's chest ache in ways he did not understand. Micah, Naomi said gently, stepping closer. Come here. The little boy obeyed immediately, though his curious eyes never fully left Adrian's face. Naomi rested one protective hand on his shoulder, while the other instinctively pulled the little girl closer against her side. Adrian noticed the exhaustion beneath Naomi's calm expression now. Tiny lines near her eyes that had not existed years ago. Shoulders slightly tense from carrying too much responsibility for too long. She looked older than 31. Not because time had been cruel. Because survival had been exhausting. Daniel leaned quietly toward Adrian again. Sir, perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere private before the press notices. Adrian finally looked around the ballroom for the first time since seeing the triplets. Nervous whispers floated between politicians and socialites pretending not to stare. Phones had already begun appearing beneath tables. One photograph of Naomi beside those children would spread through the city within hours if they were not careful. Adrian looked back toward Naomi. Come with me, he said quietly. Naomi's expression hardened immediately. No, the answer came too fast. Too sharp. Adrian froze slightly at the fear beneath it. She truly believed being alone with him was dangerous. Naomi, I said no. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances nearby. The little girl tugged softly on Naomi's sleeve again. Mama. Naomi forced herself to soften instantly when she looked down at the children. It is okay, baby. But Adrian could hear the tension buried beneath every word. Daniel carefully stepped forward. Miss Brooks, Mr. Kong only wants to talk. Naomi laughed once under her breath. Not humor. Pain. 7 years too late for that. The sentence landed harder than Adrian expected. Because she was right. Completely. Right. Adrian lowered his voice. I did not know. Naomi stared at him for several long seconds beneath the chandelier lights. You never wanted to know. That hurt most because it was true too. Adrian remembered every ignored phone call after she left. Every message he deleted without reading because business mattered more. Power mattered more. Pride mattered more. Until now. Mom, the second little boy whispered softly while peeking around Naomi's arm. Are we leaving? Naomi looked down at him immediately. Soon. Adrian studied the child carefully. This one looked quieter than Micah. More observant. He noticed things before speaking. Another trait inherited directly from Adrian himself. The realization unsettled him deeply. What are their names? Adrian asked quietly. Naomi hesitated, then finally answered. Micah, Elijah, Ava. Adrian repeated the names silently in his mind, like something sacred. Names he should have known years ago. Names he should have spoken beside birthday candles and scraped knees in bedtime stories. Instead, they sounded like strangers now. Ava tilted her head curiously while studying Adrian's face. Mama, she whispered innocently, he looks like us. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing again. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Just once. Like she had spent years dreading this exact moment. Adrian felt something collapse quietly inside his chest. Because children notice truth faster than adults ever did. Ava looked back toward Adrian with complete innocence. Did we meet him before? Naomi swallowed hard, but no words came. Adrian realized then that the triplets had grown up without a father-shaped space in their lives. No photographs. No stories. No explanations. Just silence where he should have been. And suddenly the expensive ballroom around him felt unbearably small. Rain covered Seattle by the time Naomi finally left the ballroom through the employee exit 2 hours later. The charity gala continued upstairs beneath crystal chandeliers and violin music, but Naomi could barely remember the last part of her shift. Her hands still trembled while helping fold table linens in the kitchen. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian staring at the triplets like a man watching ghosts come back to life. Mama, can we get pizza tonight? Micah asked hopefully while walking beside her beneath the rain outside the hotel. Naomi forced a small smile despite the exhaustion crushing her chest. We have leftovers at home. But leftovers are sad. Ava complained softly while holding Naomi's hand. Elijah stayed quieter than his siblings, his small hood pulled over dark curls while he carefully stepped around puddles. Naomi noticed him glancing back toward the hotel one more time. What is wrong, baby? Elijah hesitated before answering. That man looked lonely. Naomi stopped walking for half a second. The rain fell harder around them, neon lights reflecting across wet sidewalks while taxis hissed through downtown traffic nearby. Out of all 3 children, Elijah always noticed emotional things first. That frightened her sometimes. You do not need to think about him, Naomi said gently. But Elijah frowned slightly. He looked at us like he knew us. Naomi tightened her grip around the grocery bag in her hand. 7 years she had prepared for this possibility. 7 years imagining what she would say if Adrian ever appeared again. Anger, strength, coldness. Instead, all she felt now was tired. Deep, bone-level tiredness from carrying too much alone for too long. Her apartment building stood 6 blocks away in an aging neighborhood south of downtown, where rent stayed barely affordable if someone worked enough overtime. The elevator had been broken nearly 3 months now. By the time Naomi reached the 4th floor with the children, her legs already ached from the 14-hour shift. Race you to the door, Micah shouted suddenly before sprinting down the hallway. No running. Naomi called immediately, though exhaustion softened the warning. Ava laughed and chased after him while Elijah stayed close beside Naomi carrying the leftover bread rolls she brought home from the gala. The apartment itself was tiny. 2 bedrooms. Peeling paint near the kitchen ceiling. A radiator that clanged loudly whenever temperatures dropped below 40 degrees. But it smelled warm. Laundry detergent. Cinnamon. Candles. Children. Home. Ava immediately kicked off her shoes near the couch, while Micah turned on an old cartoon, still paused from breakfast. Elijah quietly placed the bread rolls on the counter before looking up at Naomi carefully. Mama. Was that man our dad? The entire apartment seemed to freeze. Naomi slowly set down her purse without answering right away. Rain tapped softly against the windows while cartoon music played faintly in the background. She had always known this conversation would come eventually. Just not tonight. Not after seeing Adrian again for the first time in 7 years. Ava looked up from the couch now too. We have a dad. Naomi swallowed hard. Her children deserve truth. But they also deserve protection from the kind of pain Adrian once gave her so easily. You do, she answered softly. Micah blinked in surprise. Then where is he? Naomi looked toward the rain outside the apartment window. Somewhere across the city, Adrian Kong was probably standing inside a penthouse worth millions while politicians shook his hand beneath expensive whiskey lights. Meanwhile, his children shared bunk beds in a 4th-floor apartment with flickering kitchen lights. The contrast almost made her laugh from the cruelty of it. Sometimes, Naomi said quietly, adults make mistakes before they understand what matters. Elijah studied her face carefully. Did he make a mistake? Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Then very softly, almost like she was speaking more to herself than the children, she answered, yes. Across the city at that exact moment, Adrian Kong stood alone inside his dark penthouse, staring at 3 names written on a folded napkin in his hand. Micah, Elijah, Ava. And for the first time in many years, the powerful mafia boss could not escape the sound of his own regret. Adrian Kong did not sleep that night. Seattle's skyline glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, while untouched whiskey melted slowly beside him on the marble counter. 3 names remained written across the folded napkin in his hand, like something sacred and unbearable at the same time. Micah, Elijah, Ava. He repeated them silently over and over, until sunrise painted pale gray light across the city. 7 years. 7 birthdays. 7 Christmas mornings. 7 first words, scraped knees, fevers, school pictures, bedtime stories. All gone. All missed because of one sentence spoken carelessly inside a cold office, while Naomi stood there carrying his children. Adrian loosened his tie slowly before walking toward the massive bookshelf lining the penthouse wall. His home looked exactly the same as it had for years. Immaculate. Expensive. Empty. Black marble floors reflected soft morning light. Designer furniture untouched by real living. Silence thick enough to hear every breath. Suddenly, the penthouse no longer looked powerful to him. It looked lonely. Daniel entered quietly just after 6 in the morning, carrying a tablet and fresh coffee. He stopped immediately after noticing Adrian still awake in yesterday's tuxedo. Sir. Adrian never looked away from the city. Find them. Daniel hesitated carefully. We already know her name. I want everything. Adrian's voice remained calm, but roughened by exhaustion. Where they live. What school the children attend. Medical records. Financial history. Daniel studied him silently for a moment before asking the question neither man truly wanted answered. And after that, Adrian finally turned. Dark circles shadowed his eyes now beneath the expensive calm he wore like armor. I do not know. That honesty unsettled Daniel more than anger ever could. Because Adrian Kong always knew exactly what to do. 2 hours later, black SUVs moved slowly through South Seattle beneath steady rain, while Adrian sat silently in the back seat, staring out tinted windows. The neighborhood changed block by block. Luxury towers disappeared first, then polished storefronts, then clean sidewalks and rooftop restaurants. Eventually, even the roads looked tired. Small apartment buildings crowded close together beneath faded signs and cracked windows. Children rode bicycles past graffiti-covered alleyways while exhausted parents hurried toward bus stops, carrying grocery bags through the drizzle. Adrian watched everything quietly. Naomi had raised his children here. The realization settled heavily inside his chest. 4th floor, Daniel said softly as the SUV slowed near the apartment building. Adrian stared upward at the aging brick structure with flickering hallway lights visible through narrow windows. Laundry hung from one balcony despite the rain. Someone downstairs argued loudly over a parking space while old music drifted faintly through open windows somewhere above. Ordinary life. Hard life. Nothing like the world Adrian built around himself. How long? Adrian asked quietly. Daniel glanced at the file. She has lived here nearly 4 years. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly. For years inside a building with broken elevators and leaking windows, while he spent millions redesigning penthouse kitchens nobody used. Shame twisted deeper through him. Across the street, the triplets suddenly appeared beneath a small bus stop shelter wearing oversized backpacks. Naomi stood beside them holding umbrellas against the rain while tying Ava's scarf tighter around her neck. Adrian stopped breathing again. Morning sunlight softened the scene gently despite the weather. Elijah leaned sleepily against Naomi's shoulder while Micah talked endlessly about something involving dinosaurs and pancakes. Ava laughed loudly enough that even the crossing guard smiled. They looked happy. Not wealthy. Not protected by bodyguards or luxury schools or private chefs. But genuinely happy. Naomi noticed the black SUV almost immediately. Her entire body stiffened. Adrian saw fear return to her face from across the street. Not surprised this time. Fear. The children followed her gaze curiously toward the vehicle. Micah squinted slightly through the rain. That is the sad man from the hotel. Naomi immediately knelt beside the triplets. Adrian could not hear her words through the glass, but he watched her gently fix Elijah's backpack while speaking softly to all 3 children at once. Protective. Calm. Always protecting them first. Then finally Naomi looked directly toward Adrian's SUV through the rain-soaked morning. Neither moved. The city noise faded around them while years of silence stood between 2 people who once almost built a family together. Adrian slowly stepped out of the vehicle into the rain. And for the first time in his life, the powerful mafia boss looked like a man completely unprepared for what came next. Rain soaked Adrian's black coat within seconds after stepping onto the sidewalk. Seattle traffic hissed through puddles nearby while morning fog drifted between crowded apartment buildings behind Naomi and the children. For a moment, nobody moved. Naomi stood beneath the bus stop shelter gripping Ava's hand tightly while the boys stayed close beside her. Adrian suddenly realized something deeply unsettling. He did not know how to approach his own children. Business negotiations had always been easy. Threats, power, contracts, money. Those worlds made sense to him. But this felt terrifyingly fragile. Mama, Micah whispered curiously. Why is he looking at us like that? Naomi lowered herself slightly beside the triplets while never taking her eyes off Adrian. Go wait near the crossing guard for 1 minute. But, Micah. Her tone softened but carried quiet authority. The children obeyed immediately, though Elijah glanced back toward Adrian several times while walking reluctantly toward the corner. Ava waved politely before following her brothers beneath the umbrellas. Adrian watched them disappear several yards away. Every instinct inside him wanted to stop them. To say something. Anything. But he remained frozen where he stood beneath the rain. Naomi finally stepped out from the shelter alone. Up close, exhaustion showed more clearly on her face now. Dark circles beneath tired eyes. Tiny stress lines near her mouth. Adrian noticed her coat first. Thin fabric. Fraying near one sleeve. Not warm enough for weather like this. Shame tightened in his chest again. Naomi, he said quietly. She crossed her arms immediately, less defensive than protective against the cold. You should not be here. Adrian looked toward the children waiting across the street. They are mine. Naomi's eyes flashed painfully. Now you notice? The words landed harder than anger would have. Rain rolled slowly down Adrian's face while silence stretched between them again. Finally, he spoke carefully. Why did you never tell me there? We're 3. Naomi laughed softly under her breath. Broken laughter. You told me to erase them. Adrian lowered his eyes immediately. The memory poisoned everything now. I was wrong. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. Do you think those words fixed 7 years? Adrian had no answer. Across the street, Micah pretended not to stare while Elijah whispered something into Ava's ear. The triplets were curious. Naomi could feel it already. Children always sensed emotional earthquakes before adults admitted they existed. I raised them alone, Naomi continued quietly. 3 babies at once. Her voice trembled slightly for the first time. Do you understand what that means? Adrian imagined sleepless nights inside tiny apartments, hospital bills, grocery budgets, 3 crying infants with no one to help carry them. Meanwhile, he had spent those same years expanding businesses, buying penthouses, hosting charity galas beneath crystal lights. The contrast felt monstrous now. No, Adrian admitted softly. I do not understand. Naomi looked surprised by the honesty. Adrian stepped closer carefully. Not enough to frighten her. But I want to. Naomi immediately shook her head. Do not do that. Do what? Pretend guilt suddenly makes you a father. The sentence cut through him cleanly because deep down Adrian feared she was right. What exactly was he now? A stranger with shared blood? A man appearing 7 years too late because regret finally became unbearable? I am not asking for forgiveness, Adrian said quietly. Naomi's expression hardened again. Good. Another silence followed while rain tapped softly against the bus stop roof beside them. Then Adrian noticed something small. Naomi's hands were shaking from the cold. Without thinking, he removed his expensive black coat and held it toward her. Naomi stared at it like it offended her. I do not need your money. It is a coat. Everything from you comes with a price. Adrian froze. Because 7 years ago, that had been true. Every gift, every apartment, every expensive dinner. Controlled. Conditional. Temporary. Naomi saw the realization hit him and looked away first. Across the street, Ava suddenly waved again. Mama. Bus. The yellow school bus approached through the rain with flashing lights reflecting across wet pavement. Naomi immediately stepped back toward the children. Adrian watched panic flicker briefly across her face again. Not hatred. Fear of disruption. Fear that his presence could damage the peaceful life she fought desperately to build for the triplets. Naomi, Adrian said softly before she walked away. She stopped but did not turn around. Please. The single word sounded unfamiliar coming from him. Smaller somehow. Naomi slowly looked back over her shoulder while rain fell between them. Adrian swallowed once before speaking the truth he should have admitted years ago. I do not know how to fix this. Naomi's eyes softened for half a second. Sadness replacing anger. That is because some things never fully heal, Adrian. Then she walked toward the children while the powerful mafia boss remained standing alone in the rain, watching his family disappear onto a school bus without him. For the next 2 weeks, Adrian Kong found himself doing something he had never done before in his life. Waiting. Not for business deals. Not for enemies to make mistakes. Waiting for glimpses of his children. Every morning, black SUVs stopped quietly half a block away from the apartment building while Adrian sat in silence behind tinted windows, watching Naomi walk the triplets toward the bus stop. Sometimes Ava carried stuffed animals inside her backpack for emotional emergencies. Sometimes Micah talked so fast Naomi could barely keep his jacket zipped. Sometimes Elijah stayed close beside her in thoughtful silence, watching the world with the same guarded eyes Adrian saw in mirrors every day. The small moments destroyed him slowly. One cold Thursday morning, Naomi noticed the SUV immediately again. Her shoulders stiffened beneath her worn coat, while helping Ava fix one crooked braid near the curb. Adrian remained inside the vehicle this time. He did not approach, did not interrupt. But the children had started noticing him now. The sad man is back, Micah whispered loudly enough that Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Ava tilted her head curiously toward the SUV. Why does he keep watching us? Naomi forced calm into her expression. Eat your granola bar. Elijah remained quiet longer than the others before finally asking the question Naomi feared most. Is he trying to know us? The school bus arrived before she could answer. Across the street, Adrian watched the children disappear again through rain-covered glass, while guilt settled deeper into his chest each day. This is unhealthy, Daniel said quietly from the front seat once the bus drove away. Adrian never looked up. Explain. You are watching their lives without being part of them. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly because he already knew that. She will not let me near them. Daniel hesitated carefully before speaking again. Can you blame her? Silence filled the SUV after that. Later that evening, Adrian stood inside one of Seattle's most expensive toy stores staring at shelves overflowing with things his children had probably never owned. Remote control cars, giant dollhouses, educational tablets, plush animals larger than Ava herself. A saleswoman approached carefully with a polite smile. Shopping for your children, sir? Adrian froze slightly at the question. Your children. Such ordinary words. Yet hearing them out loud unsettled him more than threats ever had. I do not know what they like, he admitted quietly. The woman softened immediately. How old are they? 6. She smiled warmly. That is a fun age. Adrian looked around the brightly lit store filled with parents debating birthday presents and holiday surprises. The realization hit him again with brutal force. He did not know his own children's favorite colors. Did not know what cartoons they watched. Did not know which child feared thunderstorms or who hated vegetables or whether Ava still carried stuffed animals at bedtime. Naomi knew all of it. Alone. Sir? The saleswoman asked gently. Adrian lowered his eyes toward a small dinosaur toy sitting near the register. Micah had talked about dinosaurs nonstop at the bus stop yesterday. Tiny details already carved themselves painfully into Adrian's memory now because they were all he had. Hours later, Naomi returned home exhausted after another double shift, to discover 3 gift bags sitting outside her apartment door. No note, no signature, just carefully wrapped presents beside fresh groceries and children's winter coats folded neatly against the wall. Naomi immediately knew who sent them. Mom, Ava gasped excitedly while kneeling beside the bags. Are these for us? Naomi stared at the coats silently. Expensive fabric, warm lining, better quality than anything she could currently afford. Her throat tightened painfully. Do not open them yet, she said softly. Micah frowned. Why? Because accepting help from Adrian Kong felt dangerous. Because 7 years ago she had loved him enough to trust him completely and nearly lost herself in the process. Because part of her still remembered the man before the cruelty. Naomi slowly picked up one tiny winter glove from the bag. Inside the fingertip lining, someone had accidentally left the store tag attached. The price alone could have covered groceries for 2 weeks. Elijah quietly looked up at her. He is trying. Naomi closed her eyes briefly because hearing those words from her son somehow hurt more than anger ever could. 3 days later, snow began falling lightly over Seattle for the first time that winter. Tiny white flakes drifted between apartment buildings while children pressed excited faces against classroom windows across the city. Inside Naomi's apartment, the triplets sat cross-legged on the living room floor wearing the winter coats Adrian had left outside their door. Ava spun slowly in circles while laughing. It feels like a cloud. Micah zipped his coat up and down repeatedly just because he liked the sound. Elijah sat quietly near the couch, studying the stitching inside one sleeve. He picked the right sizes, he whispered. Naomi stood in the kitchen pretending to focus on instant oatmeal while emotions twisted heavily inside her chest. The coats fit perfectly. So did the gloves. Even Ava's boots matched the tiny stars printed across her backpack. Adrian had paid attention. That frightened Naomi more than she wanted to admit. Mama, Ava asked carefully. Can we say thank you to him? Naomi stopped stirring the oatmeal for a second. The apartment stayed quiet except for the old radiator clanging near the window. You do not owe anybody anything for gifts, Naomi answered softly. But the words sounded weaker than usual. Because deep down she knew Adrian was trying in the only ways he currently understood. Money, protection, providing. He was reaching for fatherhood through the language power had taught him all his life. The problem was children needed presents more than presents. Later that afternoon, Naomi finished another lunch shift at a downtown cafe before hurrying toward the elementary school through falling snow. Her shoes soaked quickly against icy sidewalks while exhausted office workers crowded the streets carrying paper coffee cups and scarves. By the time she reached the school entrance, children were already flooding outside laughing beneath the snowflakes. Mama! Micah shouted immediately while running toward her with snow dusting his curls. Ava followed behind him smiling brightly. But Elijah stayed near the school doors talking quietly to someone taller standing beneath a black umbrella. Naomi froze instantly. Adrian. The Korean Mafia Boss stood near the school entrance wearing a dark wool coat while snow settled softly across his shoulders. Other parents glanced nervously toward him before quickly looking away again. Even standing beside elementary school artwork and tiny backpacks, Adrian Kong still carried the quiet gravity of someone dangerous. Elijah looked up at Naomi calmly. He came to see the art show. Naomi's stomach tightened. What? Adrian lowered the umbrella slightly. I did not go inside. Snowflakes melted slowly against his dark hair, while his expression remained carefully restrained. The school secretary mentioned Elijah had a painting displayed today. Naomi stared at him in disbelief. You talked to the school? Only briefly. Her pulse quickened immediately. Fear mixed with frustration beneath her exhaustion. You cannot just appear in their lives whenever you want. Adrian accepted the anger without defending himself. I know. Ava stepped closer beside Naomi while holding a paper snowflake decoration carefully in her mittened hands. He waited outside the hole. Time, she said softly. Because strangers are not allowed inside during pickup. Adrian glanced toward Ava with something painfully close to gratitude in his eyes. Naomi noticed it immediately. That look alone unsettled her. Because Adrian Kong did not know how to receive kindness anymore. Elijah slowly pulled a folded paper from his backpack before holding it toward Adrian. This was mine. Adrian hesitated before carefully taking the drawing. Crayons colored the page in messy shades of blue and silver. 3 children stood beneath falling snow beside a tall, dark figure, holding an umbrella over all of them. Above the drawing, uneven handwriting read, "The sad man is not sad anymore." Adrian stared at the paper silently while snow continued drifting around them. Naomi watched his expression change almost imperceptibly, something fragile breaking beneath years of control. I made your eyes less scary, Elijah explained seriously. Micah laughed loudly. Because before they looked like movie villain eyes. Even Naomi almost smiled at that. Adrian lowered his gaze toward the children again. Thank you, he said quietly to Elijah. The little boy shrugged. You looked lonely. Snow fell softly around all 5 of them, while traffic moved slowly beyond the schoolyard. Parents continued gathering children and hurrying home through the cold. Ordinary life unfolding everywhere. Yet Naomi suddenly realized something terrifyingly simple. Her children were beginning to care about the man who once abandoned them. And Adrian Kong looked like a man slowly realizing that love could destroy him far more completely than regret ever had. The snowstorm grew heavier over the next week, covering Seattle in quiet white streets and glowing window light. Inside Naomi's apartment, the tiny radiator fought bravely against the cold while the triplets crowded around the kitchen table doing homework beneath flickering yellow light. Ava colored snowflakes along the edges of her spelling worksheet, while Micah argued loudly that dinosaurs should count as science answers for every subject. Elijah sat closest to the window, watching snow drift slowly beyond the glass. He came again today, Elijah said quietly without looking up. Naomi paused while washing dishes in the sink. Who? You know who. Micah immediately grinned. The sad rich guy. Ava giggled softly. He brought hot chocolate to the school fundraiser. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Every day Adrian seemed to move 1 inch closer into their lives. Never pushing too hard. Never demanding. Just appearing quietly at school events. Dropping off supplies anonymously. Standing outside soccer practice beneath winter rain while pretending he happened to be nearby. The children had started expecting him now. That terrified Naomi more than anything else. You should not call him that, Naomi said softly. Micah frowned. But he always looks sad. Maybe because nobody smiles at him, Ava whispered. Naomi turned slowly toward her daughter. The innocence in the statement hit harder than criticism ever could. Children simplified truths adults complicated with pride. Later that night, after the triplets finally fell asleep tangled together beneath blankets in their shared bedroom, Naomi sat alone near the apartment window holding unpaid utility bills in tired hands. Snow reflected softly across the glass while distant sirens echoed through the city below. The power company warning sat open beside overdue rent notices she had been hiding from the children for weeks. Double shifts were no longer enough. Inflation had swallowed every extra dollar she earned. Groceries cost more. Heating cost more. Everything cost more except exhaustion. A sudden knock at the apartment door made her freeze. Naomi glanced toward the clock. Almost 11:30. Slowly she crossed the apartment and opened the door cautiously. Adrian stood there alone beneath the dim hallway light, holding a paper grocery bag in one hand. Snow melted slowly across the shoulders of his dark coat. What are you doing here? Naomi whispered immediately while glancing toward the children's bedroom. Adrian lowered his voice. Daniel found out your building lost heat twice this month. Naomi's expression hardened instantly. You investigated my apartment? I investigated whether my children are safe. The answer came calmly. Honestly, that somehow made it harder to fight. Adrian carefully held up the grocery bag. I brought soup. Naomi blinked in disbelief. Soup? The woman downstairs said Ava has been coughing. Naomi stared at him silently. 7 years ago, Adrian Kong barely remembered birthdays. Now he noticed coughs. The change unsettled her deeply. You cannot keep showing up like this, she whispered. Adrian's eyes lowered briefly toward the apartment floor. I know. Snow drifted quietly through the cracked hallway window beside them. The building smelled faintly like old pipes and laundry detergent. Adrian looked painfully out of place, standing there in expensive black wool among chipped paint and flickering lights. Yet somehow he also looked more human than she had ever seen him before. Then why are you here? Naomi asked softly. Adrian hesitated. That alone surprised her. Powerful men usually answered quickly because hesitation looked weak. But Adrian looked exhausted now in a way money could not fix. Because I keep thinking about something Micah asked me. Naomi crossed her arms slowly. What? Adrian looked directly at her for the first time since arriving. He asked why I looked sad. Silence filled the hallway. Naomi watched snowflakes melt against his dark hair while emotion tightened quietly across his face. And, she whispered. Adrian swallowed once before answering with brutal honesty. Because every time I see them, I realize how much of their lives I destroyed before they even had a chance to remember me. Naomi felt something crack painfully inside her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the truth in his voice sounded too raw to dismiss. Then suddenly tiny footsteps padded softly down the hallway behind her. Ava stood sleepily near the bedroom entrance holding her stuffed rabbit against pink pajamas. Her eyes widened immediately after seeing Adrian at the door. You came back, she whispered. Adrian looked completely unprepared for the emotion in her tiny voice. Ava rubbed one sleepy eye before asking softly, Did you bring soup? And for the first time in many years, Adrian Kong almost smiled without realizing it. Ava insisted Adrian come inside for soup before Naomi could stop her. It is rude to leave people freezing in hallways, the little girl declared seriously while dragging her stuffed rabbit across the apartment floor. Adrian stood awkwardly near the doorway after stepping inside, snow melting slowly from his coat onto worn hardwood floors. The tiny apartment suddenly felt even smaller with him inside it. Too warm. Too personal. The Triplets drawings covered the refrigerator with crooked magnets. Tiny shoes lined the wall beside the couch. A stack of overdue bills remained half-hidden beneath Naomi's purse near the kitchen counter. Adrian noticed everything, especially the signs of sacrifice Naomi tried hiding from the children. Sit, Ava ordered while climbing onto one of the kitchen chairs. Adrian blinked once before obeying automatically. Naomi watched the scene in stunned silence. The powerful mafia boss who terrified senators and businessmen now sat quietly at a tiny kitchen table decorated with crayon stains because a 6-year-old girl told him to. Micah stumbled sleepily from the bedroom moments later, rubbing his eyes. Why is the sad man here? He mumbled. He brought soup, Ava explained proudly. Elijah appeared last, calmer than his siblings as always. He studied Adrian silently before noticing the grocery bags near the door. You bought crackers too, he said quietly. Adrian nodded once. Tomato soup needs crackers. Micah's face immediately lit up. See? He understands food. Naomi almost laughed despite herself. Almost. She turned back toward the stove quickly before Adrian could notice the softness threatening her expression. The apartment filled slowly with the smell of warm soup and snow-damp coats drying near the radiator. Outside, winter wind rattled softly against the windows while the city disappeared beneath heavy snowfall. Adrian sat carefully at the small kitchen table, watching the children move around him with chaotic warmth he had never experienced before. Ava talked endlessly while organizing crackers into important patterns. Micah accidentally dropped his spoon twice because he could not stop asking questions. Elijah remained quieter, though Adrian caught him watching closely every few minutes. Studying him, trying to understand him. Did you really meet the governor? Micah asked suddenly. Adrian looked up from the soup bowl. Yes. Was he boring? Naomi choked softly on her tea while Ava gasped dramatically. But Adrian surprised everyone by answering honestly. Extremely. Micah burst into loud laughter immediately. Even Naomi smiled before she could stop herself. Adrian noticed. The moment lasted barely 2 seconds, but it changed something inside him. Because he realized he had missed the sound of ordinary happiness more than luxury ever admitted. Later that evening, the power suddenly flickered once. Then again, the apartment went dark completely. Ava whimpered softly while the radiator clanged to silence. Not again, Naomi whispered under her breath. Adrian immediately stood. How often does this happen? Naomi grabbed flashlights from the kitchen drawer without answering. The children clearly already knew the routine. That alone angered Adrian more than he expected. Mama says the building is old, Elijah explained quietly while helping Ava wrap herself in blankets. Adrian stared around the freezing apartment. Old should not mean children sleeping without heat. Naomi lit several candles carefully around the room while pretending this was normal. That hurt him most. She had become too used to struggling alone. You should all come with me, Adrian said suddenly. Naomi froze instantly. No, the roads are freezing and the heat is gone. We are fine. Adrian looked around the dark apartment illuminated only by candlelight and snow reflecting through the windows. Naomi. His voice lowered carefully. Your children are shivering. Silence filled the room. Ava leaned sleepily against Elijah while Micah wrapped blankets around his shoulders pretending he was a heroic burrito. Naomi looked exhausted suddenly. More than exhausted. Defeated in a way she tried desperately to hide from the children every single day. Adrian stepped closer slowly. Just for tonight. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the triplets huddled together beneath blankets. Pride battled visibly against fear inside her expression. Then Ava looked up softly and asked the question that shattered whatever resistance Naomi still carried. Can we see where the sad man lives? Adrian looked toward the little girl beneath flickering candlelight. Then quietly, almost painfully, he answered, You can call me Adrian if you want. But Ava shook her head immediately. I think you are becoming something else now. And suddenly the room fell completely silent. The triplets fell silent the moment Adrian's penthouse elevator doors opened. Warm golden light spilled across polished marble floors while floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Seattle glowing beneath fresh snow outside. Ava stepped out first, holding her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. Her eyes widened immediately. This looks like a movie, she whispered. Micah spun slowly in circles beneath the chandelier. Rich people's ceilings are taller, he announced seriously. Elijah stayed closest to Naomi while quietly studying everything around him with cautious eyes. Adrian watched the children absorb the space in stunned silence. For years this penthouse had been nothing more than expensive emptiness. Cold furniture. Perfect silence. Rooms nobody truly lived inside. Yet somehow the moment the triplets entered, the entire place felt different. Alive. Naomi removed the children's snow-covered coats carefully near the doorway while trying not to look overwhelmed herself. The penthouse smelled faintly like cedarwood and coffee instead of loneliness for once. You can stay in the guest rooms tonight, Adrian said quietly. Naomi immediately shook her head. The couch is enough. Adrian looked toward her calmly. Naomi. She crossed her arms instinctively. We are not taking charity. The old tension returned briefly between them until Micah suddenly pressed both hands against the enormous living room window. Mama, he shouted excitedly. You can see the whole city. Ava hurried beside him immediately while Elijah wandered carefully toward the massive bookshelf stretching across one wall. These are real books, Elijah whispered in surprise. Adrian followed his gaze. You like reading? Elijah nodded slowly while tracing one small finger across the spine of an astronomy encyclopedia. Libraries are warm, he admitted softly. The sentence hit Adrian harder than it should have. Libraries are warm. Not fun. Not magical. Warm. Another survival detail hidden inside a child's ordinary voice. Naomi noticed Adrian's expression change instantly. She looked away first because part of her already understood what was happening to him. The children were dismantling his emotional armor one innocent sentence at a time. An hour later, the penthouse kitchen looked completely transformed. Ava sat on the marble counter eating strawberries while Micah tried unsuccessfully to teach one of Adrian's private chefs how to make dinosaur-shaped pancakes. Elijah remained near Adrian asking careful questions about every painting and sculpture throughout the penthouse. Why is that one sad? Elijah asked quietly while pointing toward an abstract painting above the fireplace. Adrian studied the artwork for a moment before answering honestly. Because the artist probably was. Elijah nodded thoughtfully like that answer made perfect sense. Naomi stood silently near the kitchen island watching the scene unfold with growing disbelief. Her children looked comfortable here already. Not intimidated. Not greedy. Just curious. Open-hearted. She had spent years protecting them from Adrian Kong. Yet now they moved through his penthouse like warmth naturally belonged there. Later that night, after the triplets finally changed into borrowed pajamas from the emergency children's supplies Adrian had Daniel purchase hours earlier, snow continued falling heavily outside the windows. Ava fell asleep first curled against the oversized couch with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Micah lasted another 15 minutes before passing out halfway through an animated movie while holding popcorn in both hands. Elijah remained awake longest. He sat quietly beside Adrian near the fireplace while soft jazz music drifted through the penthouse. "Can I ask something?" Elijah whispered. Adrian lowered his coffee cup slowly. "Anything." Elijah studied the flames carefully before speaking again. "Why did you stop being lonely?" Adrian froze slightly at the question. Across the room, Naomi looked up from the blanket she had been folding. Elijah finally turned toward Adrian fully. "You still look sad sometimes," the little boy admitted softly. "But not empty anymore." The fireplace crackled gently between them while snow painted silver light across the windows behind the city skyline. Adrian looked toward the sleeping triplets curled safely across his living room. Then toward Naomi standing quietly beneath warm kitchen lights. For several seconds he could not speak at all, because nobody had ever described him more accurately than a 6-year-old child just had. Finally Adrian answered in a voice roughened by emotion he no longer knew how to hide. "Because I finally met the people I was supposed to love years ago." Elijah considered that carefully before nodding once. Then softly, almost like it was the simplest truth in the world, he whispered, "I think we were waiting for you too." By the time spring arrived in Seattle, the penthouse no longer felt like a monument built for loneliness. Crayon drawings now covered the refrigerator beside billion-dollar meeting schedules. Tiny sneakers rested near marble staircases that once echoed with silence. Micah had somehow convinced 2 private chefs to learn dinosaur pancake shapes correctly. Ava filled the living room with stuffed animals and impossible questions. Elijah spent hours reading beside the giant windows overlooking the city while quietly asking Adrian things nobody else ever dared to ask. And somewhere between school pickups, bedtime stories, and snowy mornings filled with spilled hot chocolate, the powerful mafia boss slowly became something far more frightening than a king. He became a father. Not perfectly. Not instantly. Some days the triplets still looked uncertain when Adrian hugged them goodbye before school. Some nights Naomi still woke up terrified this fragile piece could disappear the same way it once did 7 years ago. Healing moved slowly inside that family. But it moved. And for the first time in years, hope no longer felt dangerous. One warm Saturday afternoon, sunlight poured across the penthouse balcony while the triplets chased bubbles through the air overlooking Elliott Bay. Ava laughed loudly every time Micah accidentally popped his own bubbles before they floated away. Elijah sat near the glass railing sketching the skyline inside a notebook Adrian bought him weeks earlier. Naomi watched them quietly from the outdoor couch, while holding iced tea between tired hands finally beginning to rest. Adrian stepped beside her wearing rolled sleeves instead of expensive suits for once. "Daniel says I canceled 23 meetings this month," he said calmly. Naomi almost smiled. "The world survived?" Adrian looked toward the children playing beneath afternoon sunlight. Apparently, silence settled softly between them, comfortable now instead of painful. Naomi studied Adrian carefully while warm spring wind moved through the balcony curtains behind them. He looked different these days, lighter somehow, still powerful, still carrying the quiet gravity that made rooms straighten when he entered, but no longer empty. The children had changed him in ways money never could. "Mama," Ava suddenly shouted from the balcony edge. "Micah says dolphins are technically ocean puppies." "They are not," Elijah answered immediately without looking up from his sketchbook. "That is scientifically ridiculous." Adrian laughed before he could stop himself. The sound startled everyone for half a second, even him, because genuine laughter had become unfamiliar after so many years without it. Micah pointed dramatically toward Adrian. See? He thinks I am funny. Naomi watched the children surround Adrian beneath golden afternoon light while arguing about dolphins and dinosaurs and impossible 6-year-old logic. Then something inside her quietly broke open at last. Not fear this time. Relief. Deep, exhausting relief. Because for years Naomi carried motherhood alone like survival, depended entirely on her never collapsing. Now, for the first time since the triplets were born, someone stood beside her instead of behind her. Later that evening, after the children finally fell asleep tangled together across the oversized living room couch during movie night, Adrian remained sitting quietly beside them while soft jazz drifted through the penthouse. Micah's head rested against his shoulder. Ava slept curled beneath one of his arms holding her stuffed rabbit. Elijah remained stretched beside him with an open astronomy book still resting against his chest. Naomi paused in the hallway after seeing the scene. Adrian looked up slowly. Neither spoke at first. They simply stood there listening to the soft breathing of children who finally felt safe enough to sleep peacefully. Then Ava stirred slightly beneath the blanket before mumbling sleepily against Adrian's shoulder. "Good night, Dad." The room went completely still. Adrian froze. Naomi stopped breathing. Even half asleep, Ava smiled softly before drifting deeper into dreams like she had said the most natural thing in the world. "Dad." Adrian lowered his eyes immediately because suddenly emotion hit him too hard to hide anymore. 7 years ago, he rejected the existence of those children without even standing up from his desk. Now one tiny sleepy word shattered every wall he spent decades building around his heart. Naomi walked slowly toward the couch before gently resting her hand over Adrian's trembling one. No speeches, no dramatic apologies, just quiet understanding beneath warm city lights. And somewhere inside that once lonely penthouse overlooking Seattle, a broken family finally stopped feeling broken. Because sometimes love does not arrive when people deserve it. Sometimes it arrives years late carrying scars, regret, and second chances. But when it stays, it changes everything. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes people can change.